Yu-Gi-Oh has a ton of great qualities. That's why so many people are invested in it and so many people love playing it. One of my favorite things about Yu-Gi-Oh, and I feel like this is the same for a lot of people, is that there's no set rotation in the game. I mean, sure, we have the set rotation card, the quick play spell card, but we don't have set rotation as a design philosophy of Yu-Gi-Oh. Card games like Hearthstone and Pokemon and Magic, they rotate the older cards out of the standard format every couple of years. Yu-Gi-Oh, however, doesn't do that. Other than a ban list, you're pretty much allowed to use whatever cards you want, even if they were released 5, 10, 15 years ago, all in that advanced format. In today's video, I'm going to highlight 10 cards that are all more than 10 years old that are still seeing play in 2020. My friend Dual Logs did a video on this. He listed a couple cards I'm not going to talk about. Ironically, even though that video is only 2 years old, some of the cards in that video actually stopped seeing play like a year or so after that video was uploaded. Because Yu-Gi-Oh is always evolving and always changing, there's always a chance of those older cards from that video still seeing play in the future, but I just thought it was kind of funny that right now a couple of those cards actually are pretty much completely out of the meta. Because I don't live in Japan, I'm going to mention the TCG North America release dates for these cards in today's video, although in most cases they're not too far off of the OCG, just a little bit on a delay. Anyway, at number 10 we have Foolish Burial, which is currently limited on the Forbidden and Limited list. This card was released way back in 2007, so 13 years ago, and is still being played to this day, actually quite a lot. Foolish Burial is a card that is very, very hard to power creep. It's a normal spell card with no drawbacks, lets you send any monster from your deck to the graveyard. There are plenty of other good cards that mimic this effect, like Lavalval Chain and the Lightsworn Link monster, but Foolish Burial is where it all started, and this thing is insanely, insanely powerful. It might not look so strong compared to a card like Painful Choice that is obviously unfair, but Foolish Burial is just a toolbox card for almost any strategy, casual or competitive, over the course of the last 13 years. This thing is just so good in any deck. There are so many graveyard effects in Yu-Gi-Oh that it's going to be really hard to power creep Foolish Burial at any point. If anything, this card probably would not go up the ban list to 2 or 3 copies per deck, but it'd be way more likely to actually get banned. I'm not sure if Konami is looking to do that anytime soon, because it's not super unfair as a searchable one-of, but it certainly is extremely powerful, and in some cases might seem unfair depending on what deck you're playing. Over the past 10 years especially, Yu-Gi-Oh has only gotten more graveyard focused, even compared to when it was first released back in 2007, so for that reason I think that this card will see play for a very, very long time. At number 9 we have Solemn Judgment, released all the way back in 2002, Metal Raiders. Holy crap, this card is 18 years old, and what's funny is that when this card was first released, it wasn't considered that good because the game wasn't very fast, so life points mattered a lot more than they did like several years after the card was released. However, as time went on and people realized that life points didn't matter that much and negation was super powerful, Solemn Judgment basically became a staple 3-of for almost every single deck out there. In summary, just saying no to almost any activation your opponent might have besides monster effects, although there's another Solemn for that, is always going to be a really good idea. Right now, Solemn Judgment is a staple 3-of in every single back row deck in the entire game. It is actually a necessary card if you're playing Altergeist or True Draco or Guru Control or anything along those lines. You need to have a card to stop your opponent's Evenly Matched or Lightning Storm or Twin Twisters, and Solemn Judgment is one of the best cards and one of the only cards that can actually stop all of those that I just mentioned. There are cards that are individually good against Evenly Matched or individually good against Lightning Storm. Not a lot of them though cover every single one of those, unlike Solemn Judgment, which absolutely does. Besides that though, it's not only good against back row removal, which is one of the reasons that you want to play it, but you can also just use it to stop a big summon or an important spell activation that your opponent might have. At number 8 we have Didi Crow, released in 2007, the same year that Foolish Burial was released. And in the same way that Foolish Burial gets better as time goes on and we get more and more graveyard effects, so does Didi Crow. We certainly have had sort of a Ghost Girl hand trap version of this card, Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion, released that might power creep it in some ways, but Didi Crow has still remained a very powerful hand trap even in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! It's not too long ago that you can find Didi Crow in main decks of many different strategies against the Orcus deck. This card pretty much has stood the test of time, not because it's one of the first hand traps, but just because it's so powerful and there's not really another effect like it, at least not in a hand trap form. Didi Crow was not the first hand trap released, but it is one of the oldest hand traps that is still seeing play right now. This card is extremely powerful powerful against a variety of decks, and even right now it's pretty good against both Eldritch and Adamancipator. It's not quite at the level it was a couple formats ago when Orcus was the top strategy and you had people main decking Didi all over the place, but it is still one of those cards that will always come up in discussions whenever a format revolves around several important graveyard effects. Speaking of old hand traps, number 7 is Effect Veiler, which was released back in 2010, 10 years ago. This is actually the most recent card on the list, which might surprise some of you because the card might seem older than it actually is. This card might seem like a worse Infinite Impermanence, and certainly in some cases it is. However, when people need extra copies of Impermanence, or perhaps when they're playing Phantasme and want to draw into a hand trap, Effect Veiler has still been the go-to option for many players. This thing used to be very, very expensive, first released as an Ultra and Ultimate Rare, but it got so many reprints over the years that a lot of players were actually able to buy it for way less than it originally was priced. This was huge, and it's now one of the more budget-friendly hand traps out there, if not the best budget-friendly hand trap in the game. While it won't always be good in every single format, and while it's not seeing a ton of play right now in the TCG, it is always going to be a card that's never going to be completely terrible. Monster effects are everywhere. Just like in the case of DD Crow, where I say that graveyard effects are everywhere, monster effects are always going to be part of the game. When there are cards in the format, though, that are once per turn effects that you really want to negate, like Nightmare Mermaid or Solemn Great Mirage Stalio, Effect Veiler is always going to be an option for players. Like I said, there have been plenty of decks out there that were topping and winning events playing not only 3 Effect Veiler, but also 3 Infinite Impermanence. At number 6, we have 1-for-1, a very powerful spell card that's pretty much only gotten better with age, very similar to Foolish Burial. Both of them are very powerful normal spell cards with almost no downside, although 1-for-1 at least does have a cost. You have to discard a monster card, but still, this card is insanely powerful. Level 1 monsters do have some really powerful effects. You might not expect that out of the lowest level monsters in the game, but that's one of the ways that Konami has been able to make them valuable. You know, you put a level 1 monster and you make it have 0 attack and 0 defense, but then you give it a really insane effect. Well, suddenly you really want to summon that off of 1-for-1. It's pretty much always been powerful since its original 2009 release, and even right now we still see it getting played in pretty much any deck using level 1 monsters. That's no surprise, but obviously special summoning monsters that otherwise you wouldn't have a great way to search, something like Glow Up Bulb comes to mind, is going to be really good. Sometimes Konami goes a little bit too far and 1-for-1 becomes insanely overpowered, like in Spirals. Summoning Spiral Quick Fix is probably way too unfair. However, in most cases this card is just a very powerful extender, not necessarily doing anything overpowered, but just doing really good stuff for any deck playing level 1 monsters. At number 5, we have Terraforming. Now this card in North America was released in 2003, but for the rest of the TCG players it was released in 2005. Terraforming is currently limited, but unlike a couple of the other normal spells we've mentioned in today's video, it wasn't always really powerful. As the years have gone on though, Konami has made more and more field spell focused strategies, and that really made Terraforming a little bit too good. The main problem here is that when you make a field spell based deck, obviously you want to give players ways to search their field spell because it's so important for their strategy. However, when you have 3 copies of Terraforming, that essentially means you have 6 copies of whatever field spell you're playing, which is a little bit too consistent even for modern Yu-Gi-Oh! So right now the card is limited, which is probably for the best, but it is still a very important piece for any field spell based strategy. 1 copy of this card can be used to search out whatever field spell you need, and in the past we've seen people play even multiple different copies of field spells and then copies of Terraforming to search whichever one they want in that situation. I remember some cases where like decks that are playing field spells side deck into 1 Necro Valley or 1 Mystic Mine just to search off of the Terraforming that they would already be playing. Personally, I feel like Terraforming got a little bit too good starting off sometime after they made the field spell ruling change, which isn't super surprising. Basically, prior to the summer of 2014, there was only 1 field spell on the field at a time. However, with 2014, Konami changed it so both players could control 1 field spell for their own strategy. After that rule change, Konami started to print exponentially more field spell based strategies, so Terraforming naturally got a lot better. At number 4, we have 2 different cards. So we have Armageddonite and Dark Grepher. Now, why are these on the list in the same spot? Well, both of them were released not only in 2008, but also in the exact same set, Phantom Darkness, and both of them are pretty similar in that they work with dark monsters and sending dark monsters to the grave. In the case of Dark Grepher, you have a slightly different effect. You know, you can special summon it, you can get a monster out of your hand, and in the case of Armageddonite, it just triggers monsters on summon to mill a dark from your deck. In both cases though, these cards have been exceptionally powerful over the years and are currently both limited, probably for many of the same reasons as Foolish Burial. It is simply too good to have near costless ways to send monsters to the graveyard, not to mention that dark monsters in particular have a ton of different graveyard-based strategies. Armageddonite is actually hilarious, well maybe not hilarious, but Armageddonite is actually a card that has so many different one-card FTKs it's not even funny. These cards are extremely good in almost any deck playing dark monsters, and pretty much since their release 12 years ago, you can always find at least one of them in a dark-based strategy. Clearly though, Konami learned their lesson with these two cards, because while the other attributes have gotten similar cards, like Dawn Knight for example, they're much worse. They either send worse things, or they're a lot more restrictive in how they actually activate. Instead of just normal summoning it, like in the case of Armageddonite, Dawn Knight for example has to be sent from the field to the graveyard. Not impossible to set up, and obviously light monsters have a lot of graveyard effects too, but just bad enough or just worse enough compared to Armageddonite that it hasn't seen a lot of competitive play. Speaking of dark monsters that are good to send to the graveyard with Armageddonite and Dark Grepher, we have Destiny Hero Malicious as number 3 on our list. This card was released back in 2007 and has only gotten better with age. When this card was first released, it was mostly played alongside Destiny Draw to discard it and draw 2 new cards, and then special summon a new Malicious from the deck to tribute for a tribute summon. As time went on though, and we got more and more extra deck mechanics, specifically synchros and link monsters, Malicious just got even better. Level 6 is perfect for many synchro summons because you can easily pair it with a level 1 or level 2 tuner monster to make some really powerful synchros that are level 7, level 8, and being a dark warrior means it combos with Armageddonite and Dark Grepher, so you always have easy access to it. When link monsters came out, it was important that it was a warrior monster, so you could use it with all the warrior link monster support like Isolde, that was one of the most overpowered link monsters for a long time, and even nowadays, while the card isn't as popular, it pretty much always is one of those cards that is in the back of players' minds. Besides not being a once per turn effect, which means you can summon multiple copies in the same turn, all using the graveyard ability, one of the reasons this card has been so popular over the years is how easy it is to get to. You can use that Armageddonite or the Dark Grepher or Elemental Hero Stratos or plenty of other warrior support cards to get to your Destiny Hero Malicious. This is one of those cards that whenever it's at 3 copies per deck, someone somewhere is probably doing something degenerate with it, but even at 2 copies per deck, the card is still pretty valuable. At number 2, we have Upstart Goblin, a card released in 2002 for North America and 2004 for the rest of the TCG players. Now, one of the things that I've found over talking about a lot of cards is that Upstart Goblin is by far one of the most confusing cards to show to newer players or more casual players. The reason is that a lot of people look at this card and they say, well, if you just didn't play it, you would have drawn the other card anyway, so why give your opponent a free 1000 life points? However, as I've explained in the Why Everyone Played Upstart Goblin video, this card breaks deck building because essentially if you have a deck with 3 copies of Upstart Goblin, you are playing a 37 card deck. For a pretty long time, while this card was at 3 copies per deck, a lot of players swore by playing 3 copies in whatever deck they were playing. The consistency boost from Upstart Goblin is small, but still noticeable, especially over many rounds in a longer tournament. The final card I want to talk about was released in 2007 in Phantom Darkness alongside Armageddonite and Dark Grepher, and that is Super Polymerization. For a pretty long time, this card was not considered very good. There just wasn't a lot of good fusion monsters to summon with Super Poly because on paper, the card is a pretty big minus, especially if you're only using your own monsters for the summon. You have to discard a card, you can only use monsters on the field, and yes, your opponent can't respond to it, but if you don't actually have anything worthwhile to bring out, that part doesn't really matter. Where this card first started seeing a lot of play though was in hero decks, because hero decks suddenly had Absolute Zero and the Shining, cards that you could pretty much generically make with one hero monster and one monster of a certain attribute. With Super Poly then, you could just basically remove one of your opponent's monsters for free without them having a chance to respond to it, and suddenly the card was very good. However, it wasn't until 2014 where this card actually became so overpowered that Konami had to ban it. You see, in 2014, people suddenly realized that, oh, you can just main deck 3 Super Poly in Shaddolls, because the format at that time was Shaddolls, Burning Abyss, and Satellar Knights. Now, those decks all revolve around either light or dark monsters, and the 2 best Shaddol fusion monsters, Construct and Winda, take 1 Shaddol monster and 1 light or dark, depending on which one you're trying to summon. So So a lot of Shaddoll players just suddenly had this 3 of card that could push through almost any interruption because your opponent can't respond to it, and suddenly you have this card that every single Shaddoll player is main decking 3 copies of, and it's super frustrating to play against. Nowadays, we still do see Shaddolls, which are currently back in the meta after getting a structure deck, use Super Poly, but the card has been played in a lot of other cases. What's happened over the years is that we've gotten generic fusion monsters that take like 2 dark monsters or 2 whatever monsters, and you can use Super Poly not on your own cards, but just to remove your opponent's monsters, especially ones that have built-in negation effects. So for this reason, Super Poly hasn't been so much of a toolbox card as it has been in Shaddolls or Heroes in the past, but more so outside of Shaddolls, it's just been a really good piece of going second removal for many combo-based strategies that set up really big boards. There are way more cards than I could fit into one video that fall under the category of cards released more than 10 years ago that are still seeing play right now, and to me, like I said at the beginning of the video, that is one of my favorite things about this game. Anyway though, I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for watching today's discussion video. Goodbye.